I was thinking about Wong Kar-Wai the other day, as you usually do, and one of those really distinctive things about his visual identity as a director, which is this technique called step printing. Now, step printing is relatively complicated to explain, but the easiest way of saying it is that you're essentially filming at a lower shutter speed so that everything is much more blurred, and at a lower frame rate so that things are happening twice as quickly on screen, and then playing each one of those frames for a longer period of time in order to fill up the 24 frames a second that makes up a standard film speed rate. So what I wanted to do is to take this technique and see if I could apply it in post to a film that had already been made. So of course for this I chose the iconic film Stepmom, a 1998 film starring Julia Roberts and Susan Sarandon. And there's this one particular scene in which this character is looking for this kid. So I just want to emphasize before we start that this already has a bit of motion in it, and then I've actually kind of zoomed into her during this clip, and I think all of that motion really helps sell the effect. If you don't have much motion, you won't see much difference, and what you do see will look a bit strange, so it's just worth being careful about how you apply this and to what kind of footage you give it to. Your mileage may vary. So I start by slowly zooming into Julia Roberts' character during this clip, and then I time stretch the footage to make it run slower. Then I set a number of adjustment layers that I'll explain now. So the first thing we do is posterize the time, which makes everything below the adjustment layer look like it's running at a much slower frame rate. I set it to 5 frames a second, which is really slow, so you're only getting like a couple of frames within the same amount of time that you would normally get a full amount of motion. Then I add this effect called pixel motion blur, which basically works out the difference between pixels frame to frame and then calculates a fake motion blur that happens between them. This is because when you shoot something at a lower frame rate with a longer shutter speed, you get these long blurs between the steps, so this is what we're essentially producing here. Now this whole process would have really been done in a lab on film originally, usually making it look a little bit worse. It would degrade the quality of the print ever so slightly, so I've also added 2 things to kind of give that sense as well. First of all, I've added a grain layer, which is posterized, and then I've added a glow, which is just very softly laid over the top. It's not too strong, and the end result looks something like this. So there you go. It's a very specific use case, but I do think it's a really cool looking technique. And I also like that when we try to work out how something was done, you know, VFX or visual techniques, whether that's applying them in post or doing it on our own shoots. I've done step printing with a camera before. We kind of learn something in the process of like reverse engineering things. We can discover new techniques, and I think this is a really neat one. So I really recommend, you know, separate just to doing this step printing tutorial, that if you see a technique that you like in a film, jump into After Effects, take a camera out with some friends and try and work out how it was done. You'd be surprised what you can discover. And there you go, step printing. You can do it yourself, either with a camera or with After Effects. And just remember that you owe Wong Kar-Wai, but then hey, we all owe Wong Kar-Wai.